Snow fell thick that night, swallowing the city lights of Manhattan. Inside the Hale penthouse, everything gleamed. Crystal glasses, marble floors, and a man too proud to bend. Richard Hale stood by the fireplace, a Mont Blanc pen in his hand, while Claire Donovan clutched her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with twins. "You're not fit to be in my world anymore," he said, voice calm, cold, final. "You've embarrassed me, Claire. You made me look weak." Claire's voice trembled. "I lost my job because of your lies, Richard. I didn't steal anything. You know that." He didn't even look at her. "The board doesn't care who's guilty. They only care that I fix it. And the fastest way to fix it is to remove the problem." "The problem?" She stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold air. "You mean me?" He smirked. "Sign the papers, Claire. You'll get the apartment for a month and a small settlement. Enough to start over somewhere, quieter." Her tears blurred the gold light. "I'm carrying your children." Richard laughed softly, almost pitying. "You said that last time. Forgive me if I don't take your word for it." The cruelty landed like a slap. Claire's knees buckled, her hands gripping the edge of the marble counter. She could feel the twins kicking, tiny heartbeats pleading for air. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, Richard's phone buzzed. A message from Lila Stanford, his new investor and secret lover. He smiled faintly, not bothering to hide it. "You should go, Claire. It's snowing. You don't want to make a scene." She stared at him, a man she once loved, now a stranger wrapped in a designer suit and arrogance. "You'll regret this." "Regret?" he echoed. "Regret freeing myself from a liability? I don't think so." He turned away, closing the door to his office. The lock clicked. Claire stood there, shaking. The silence pressed against her chest. Somewhere in the building, a clock chimed midnight. She grabbed her coat from the rack, though her hands trembled so badly the buttons slipped. She whispered to her unborn babies, "Hold on, my loves. Mommy's here." When the elevator opened, the doorman looked at her, pale, barefoot, clutching her stomach, and didn't dare ask a word. The doors slid shut. Down on Fifth Avenue, snow hit her face like knives. Her taxi app wouldn't load. Her phone battery blinked red, 1% left. She started walking toward the bus stop, through wind and glassy puddles, until the light from the penthouse vanished behind her. By the time she reached the corner, her knees gave out. Pain ripped through her abdomen, sharp and unstoppable. She fell into the snow, whispering the only promise she could still keep. "You will live, even if I don't." And somewhere, high above, behind those golden windows, Richard poured himself another drink, unaware that the woman he just discarded would one day return, not broken, not begging, but flying above him in a jet he could never afford to touch. The world didn't stop for Claire Donovan. It just moved on without her. 2 weeks after that night, she gave birth prematurely. One baby, Mason, came out fighting, crying so loud the nurses gasped. The other, Leo, didn't cry at all. He was too small, too fragile, his heart murmuring like a flickering candle. Claire lay in the hospital bed, her face pale, clutching the thin blanket as the doctors rushed Leo to the NICU. "Where's the father?" a nurse asked. Claire turned her head toward the empty doorway. "He's busy. Busy signing contracts, busy smiling for cameras, busy pretending she never existed." When she was discharged, the hospital handed her 2 bills thicker than her entire savings. Richard hadn't paid a cent. He'd blocked her number, changed his assistant's contact, even removed her name from the company's health insurance list. Back in her one-room sublet in Brooklyn, the ceiling leaked whenever it rained. The radiator hissed but never worked. Claire set up a crib near the wall, plugged in a borrowed heater, and told herself she could survive anything. For the first few months, she worked nights at a diner near the bridge, serving coffee to construction workers and cab drivers. The tips barely covered baby formula. She'd rush home before dawn, check Leo's oxygen monitor, kiss Mason's forehead, and sleep sitting up with a baby in each arm. Sometimes when the city slept, she'd scroll through her phone, watching Richard's smiling face on news headlines. Hale Group breaks ground on new skyscraper. Hale and Stanford, the power couple of New York. The comments section made her stomach twist. She's lucky he dumped that gold digger. He built his empire after cutting dead weight. Dead weight. That's what she'd become in their eyes, a mistake erased from his story. Then came the day everything truly collapsed. One morning, her manager at the diner called her into the back office. "Sorry, Claire," he said. Your paycheck's been garnished? Something about a lawsuit? What lawsuit? He handed her the paper. Richard's lawyers had filed a defamation claim, accusing her of spreading lies about his personal life. She hadn't said a word to anyone, but that didn't matter. The letter demanded $20,000 in damages. She stared at the page until her eyes burned. It was his final blow. Bury her legally so she'd never stand up again. That night, she sold her engagement ring to pay for Leo's medicine. The pawnshop clerk weighed the diamond under a harsh fluorescent light and said, "I can give you 800. It's small. 800. Once, that ring cost 40,000. She took the cash, walked outside, and bought a cup of coffee from a street cart just to feel human again. The barista's name tag read Ben. He smiled kindly. Rough night? Claire laughed weakly. Rough year. He gave her a free muffin. She cried right there on the sidewalk. Winter turned to spring. Mason learned to say mama. Leo learned to breathe without a tube. Claire learned how to live with the ache that never left. Every time she pushed the stroller past the Manhattan skyline, she whispered to her boys, "One day you'll see that glass tower. You'll know your mother didn't break. She just bent until she could stand again." She didn't know it yet, but that tower, the one with Richard's name in silver letters, would soon become the stage where her entire world turned upside down again. Because in New York, ghosts don't stay buried. And sometimes, the woman you tried to destroy comes back with proof that could destroy you. The hospital smelled like bleach and heartbreak. Machines beeped in rhythm with Claire's pulse as she stared at the glass window separating her from Leo. Tiny tubes ran into his nose, his chest rising just enough to prove he was still fighting. Mason, his twin, slept soundly in a plastic bassinet beside her. Two boys, born the same minute, but one trapped in a battle for life the other would never remember. Claire pressed her hand to the glass, whispering, "You hold on, baby. Don't let go, not yet." The nurse, an older woman named Karen, gave her a sympathetic glance. "You're lucky he's strong for his size," she said. "But the surgery, it won't be cheap. You'll need the father's consent for insurance coverage." Claire's throat tightened. "He's not coming." Karen frowned. "Honey, he needs to sign the authorization." Claire shook her head. "He won't. He said they're not his children." Karen sighed and walked away. Claire's hand stayed on the glass. For the next 3 nights, she barely slept. Every time Leo's monitor beeped irregularly, her heart jumped out of rhythm too. She sold her wedding dress online, sold the last of her jewelry, the Mont Blanc pen Richard once gave her for Christmas. "For the woman who keeps me grounded," he'd said. Now she pawned it for half its worth to pay for Leo's medication. One evening she called Richard again, her voice trembling. "He needs the surgery, Richard. He's your son." His voice came through sharp, confident, rehearsed. "Stop calling me. You made your choices. Live with them. Please, just sign the paper." "Not happening. Lose my number, Claire." The call ended. The line went dead, just like a door slamming shut. 2 hours later, she stood outside Hale Tower, clutching the documents against her chest, hoping to catch him leaving work. Snow was falling again, soft flakes melting on her lashes. When Richard's Mercedes pulled up, she stepped forward, waving. The driver honked. Richard lowered the window halfway, annoyed. "Richard, please, just one signature." He glanced at her coat, frayed and soaked, and smirked. "Don't embarrass yourself, Claire. You're not good at this game." "It's not a game. It's a life." He rolled up the window, the car pulling away, leaving slush splashing over her shoes. Claire stood frozen, the wind biting her face, papers clutched so tight they wrinkled. For a moment she wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. "He will live, even if I have to crawl." The next morning, she returned to the hospital and signed the surgery consent herself, marking the line where father's signature was supposed to go. Underneath it, she wrote unknown. When the doctor asked who would cover the cost, she said, "Me." He looked doubtful. "It's 82,000. I'll find it." She didn't know how, but she did. She took double shifts, borrowed money, cleaned apartments, sold old furniture. Sometimes she ate once a day. She'd watch Mason crawl toward her with his chubby hands and feel her strength return. On the day of the surgery, she sat outside the operating room with both hands clasped, repeating a silent prayer she didn't even believe in anymore. When the doors opened and the surgeon smiled, tears burst down her cheeks. "He's alive," he said. "Your boy made it." She cried harder, whispering thanks to no one and everyone. Outside, morning sunlight hit the hospital glass like a promise. Claire looked up, eyes swollen, voice raw. "We're still here." She didn't know this victory would cost her later, but that the debt, the sleepless nights, the exhaustion, would soon push her to the edge again. But for now, she held both her boys, one sleeping, one breathing through tubes, and whispered, "We made it, my loves. We made it." While Claire was counting coins for baby formula, Richard Hale was counting zeros on contracts. 3 years after abandoning her, he had become Manhattan's golden son, the man every magazine called the visionary of Park Avenue. His grin flashed from billboards, from glossy covers beside his fiancée, Lila Stanford, the daughter of a senator. Together, they looked like a dynasty in the making. At every gala, Richard's name floated like perfume in the air. Sharp, expensive, impossible to ignore. He wore tailored Armani suits, gold cufflinks engraved with his initials, and a confidence that could fill a ballroom. When reporters asked about his past, he'd chuckle. "Let's just say I learned who to trust." No one questioned him. No one asked about the woman he left behind. Inside his company, Hale Group, success came from illusion. Richard had built his empire on borrowed money and whispered favors. The charity wing, the Hale Children's Foundation, was his most brilliant lie, a shell account to move dirty funds through fake donations. The same charity he claimed helped single mothers. The irony didn't sting him. He didn't feel irony anymore. Every Friday, he and Lila hosted cocktail parties at their penthouse overlooking Central Park. Politicians, actors, bankers, everyone wanted to be seen in Richard's orbit. Lila played the perfect hostess, always smiling, always elegant. She believed his story, that Claire had been unstable, obsessed, even dangerous. "She tried to ruin me," Richard would whisper to her, pouring whiskey into crystal glasses. "I had to walk away." Lila would touch his arm and say softly, "You did the right thing, darling. Some people aren't built for greatness." And he'd smile, pretending to believe that. But sometimes, late at night, when the party lights dimmed and the city turned quiet, he'd catch a glimpse of something in the mirror. A flash of guilt he couldn't quite name. He'd push it away, pour another drink, and scroll through social media until it disappeared. Across the city, Claire saw every photo, every headline. Sometimes Mason would point at the TV and say, "That man looks like me." Claire's chest would tighten. She'd switch off the screen before the ache turned into tears. The world had chosen its hero, and it wasn't her. But even as Richard built higher, cracks began to show. His CFO, a sharp-eyed woman named Marcy, noticed inconsistencies in the donation records. "These numbers don't match," she said one morning. Richard waved it off. "Just accounting errors. Fix it." Marcy hesitated. "If the SEC audits us, they won't." He smiled that disarming smile that had gotten him everything he ever wanted. They never do. Still, that night, Marcy copied the files onto a flash drive, just in case. Meanwhile, Richard was busy orchestrating his next move, a public engagement announcement with Lila at the Plaza Hotel, followed by an exclusive charity dinner. The same night, his PR team advised inviting former associates to show forgiveness and transparency. He smirked when he saw one name on the list, Claire Donovan. "She's still alive?" he joked. "Barely," his assistant replied, "working at a coffee shop in Brooklyn." Richard leaned back, the corner of his mouth curving upward. "Perfect. Send her an invitation. Make it look official, something about discussing custody. Tell her to come, alone." His laughter echoed across the penthouse, bouncing off glass and gold. While he polished his reputation, Claire was polishing cups at midnight, unaware that the man who ruined her was about to drag her name into the spotlight again, this time to destroy her publicly. But destiny had been quietly preparing its revenge. Somewhere, far from Richard's penthouse, a man named Ethan Ward was opening a file labeled Hale Foundation. Suspicious transfers. And for the first time in 3 years, the balance of power had begun to shift. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, tucked among unpaid bills and grocery flyers, the invitation that would change everything. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, embossed with gold lettering that shimmered under the kitchen light. The Plaza Hotel, an evening of charity and celebration hosted by Hale Group. Claire stared at the name printed on the card, Richard Hale, founder and CEO. Her stomach twisted. For 3 years, she'd forced herself to ignore every headline, Every photo of him standing beside his new fiancée, Lila Stanford. But now his name was sitting in her hands, written in gold, mocking her poverty with every gleam. At first, she thought it was a mistake until she unfolded the letter inside. Dear Miss Donovan, we would like to discuss the terms of legal custody concerning Mason and Leo. Please attend the Hale Group's charity dinner this Saturday at the Plaza Hotel. Mr. Hale wishes to resolve matters privately and respectfully. Claire's hands trembled. Her lawyer's number was still disconnected. She couldn't afford legal counsel. But if Richard was finally willing to talk about custody, after ignoring her for years, she couldn't refuse. Her first instinct was hope. Maybe for once he wanted to do the right thing. Maybe he'd sign the papers to get their son's proper medical coverage. Maybe Leo could finally get that next heart procedure. But then she saw the date, Saturday, 7 p.m., the same evening that New York Weekly had just reported Richard Hale's engagement gala with Lila Stanford would take place at the Plaza. Claire froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The charity dinner wasn't about custody. It was a trap. She sat down at the chipped kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands. The fluorescent light flickered above her. Mason and Leo were in the next room, playing with a broken toy train. Their laughter filled the small apartment like sunlight in a cage. Her chest ached. He's doing it again, she whispered. He wants to humiliate me. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, reliving every insult, every cruel smirk. How Richard had called her unstable, unfit, a mistake. How he'd denied his own sons. And yet, he'd sent the invitation, which meant he still wanted something. By dawn, she made her decision. She would go. Not to beg, not to cry, but to look him in the eyes and remind him that she still existed. The next day, she called the hospital to check Leo's latest results. The nurse said his condition was stable but would need another surgery soon. Insurance still hasn't approved it, the nurse added softly. Without the father's authorization, we can't proceed. Claire's throat closed. Thank you, she managed. She hung up and stared at the letter again. Now it wasn't about pride, it was survival. Her old friend from the diner, Angie, helped her pick out a dress. It's not new, but it's elegant, Angie said, holding up a navy gown from a thrift shop. Claire smiled weakly. It's perfect. She rehearsed what she'd say to Richard. Calm, factual, no emotion. This isn't about us, it's about our sons. But deep down, she knew Richard didn't want a conversation. He wanted a scene. Friday night, as she tucked the boys into bed, Leo looked up with sleepy eyes. Mama, are you sad? She kissed his forehead. No, baby. I'm just getting ready. Where are you going? To remind someone that your mama's still here. When the lights went out, she sat alone by the window, staring at the Manhattan skyline. The plaza's rooftop glittered in the distance like a crown she'd once worn and lost. Claire didn't know that miles away in a high-rise office, Richard was telling Lila and his investors, "Don't worry, she'll come. And when she does, everyone will see what kind of woman she really is." He didn't know that the woman he planned to humiliate was walking toward the very moment that would end his empire. The night before the event, Claire stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, staring at the woman reflected back at her. Her face was pale, framed by exhaustion and sleepless nights. The thrift store gown hung loosely from her shoulders, but it was clean and pressed. She brushed her hair with trembling hands, tied it into a neat bun, and whispered to herself, "You're not going there to cry. You're going there to fight." The invitation sat on the counter beside a lipstick she hadn't worn in years. Soft rose, the same shade she'd worn the night Richard first told her he loved her. She almost threw it away, but stopped. "Not for him," she muttered. "For me." In the next room, Mason and Leo slept side by side, their tiny chests rising and falling in sync. Mason murmured something in his sleep. Leo reached for his brother's hand. That small, innocent gesture made Claire's throat tighten. She crouched beside the bed, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "I'll come back. I promise." At 3 a.m., she sat at the table, staring at hospital bills spread like landmines. Leo's next surgery was scheduled for March, but the hospital wouldn't move forward without Richard's signature as the legal father. She tried everything, calls, letters, begging his assistant, but nothing worked. The only thing left was to face him. She needed to look strong, even if she wasn't, but strength cost money she didn't have. So at sunrise, Claire took her old iPhone, the one with the cracked screen, and walked into a pawn shop on Lexington Avenue. The owner, a heavy man with gold chains, raised an eyebrow. $50, he said flatly. It's worth more than that, Claire argued. He shrugged. Not with a broken screen. She hesitated, then slid the phone across the counter. Fine. When she stepped back outside, she felt lighter and emptier. $50 bought her a pair of heels and a train ticket to Manhattan. She worked her final shift that day at the cafe, hands shaking as she poured coffee for customers who would never know her story. Angie, her friend and coworker, noticed. You sure about this, Claire? That man doesn't deserve a minute of your time. Claire smiled faintly. He doesn't, but my sons do. When her shift ended, she walked to the bus stop under the fading winter sky. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow, the same way it had the night she was thrown out of Richard's penthouse. That memory hit like a knife. But something inside her had changed. She wasn't the same woman who begged at that marble doorstep. She'd carried 2 babies through poverty, fear, and hospital walls. She'd fought every day just to keep them alive. And now, she wasn't walking toward humiliation. She was walking into a battlefield. At home, she packed her purse carefully. Hospital documents, the boys' birth certificates, and the DNA tests she'd saved for this very moment. Proof that Mason and Leo were Richard's sons. She looked in the mirror one last time before leaving. He thinks I'm broken, she said softly. Let him find out how wrong he is. At 6 p.m., a black car stopped outside her building. Angie had called in a favor from her cousin, a driver for a private company. The man opened the door politely. Miss Donovan? The plaza, right? Claire blinked in surprise. Yes, thank you. As the car glided toward Manhattan, city lights blurred against the window. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear the radio playing Sinatra in the background. She clutched her purse tighter. Somewhere across town, at that exact moment, Richard was adjusting his cufflinks, yet rehearsing his smile, certain that tonight would be the night he erased her forever. He didn't know that the woman walking through the snow toward his grand event carried not shame, but a truth sharp enough to cut through his empire. The Plaza Hotel glittered like a diamond against the Manhattan night, its marble steps lined with chauffeurs and photographers. Inside, chandeliers dripped gold over polished tables where champagne glasses sparkled like tiny suns. Every guest seemed to wear success like perfume. But among them all, one man stood taller, prouder. Richard Hale, the king of the evening. Everything perfect? He asked his assistant, straightening his tie. Yes, sir. Guests are arriving. Press coverage is already trending. The engagement announcement will go live at 8. Richard smirked. Good. I want her to see it. Her meant Claire Donovan, though he never spoke her name out loud anymore. He wanted her to feel like a ghost in her own story. Lila Stanford glided toward him in a gown that shimmered like starlight, a perfect image for the cameras. Darling, she whispered, kissing his cheek. Everyone's talking about us. You've outdone yourself. Richard looked around the grand ballroom, filled with New York's elite. Investors, senators, magazine editors. They were all here to celebrate his engagement and his upcoming IPO. It wasn't just a party. It was his coronation. And the crown jewel of his plan, inviting the ex-wife he'd buried in scandal to stand before them, broke, alone, desperate. He pictured it perfectly. Claire arriving in her cheap dress, standing awkwardly by the door while whispers spread. Someone would ask, isn't that the woman who tried to ruin him? And the humiliation would finish her once and for all. Make sure security lets her in, he told the staff. I don't want her stopped. Let her see what she lost. Meanwhile, in the kitchen corridor, a waiter carrying a silver tray overheard every word. His name tag read, E. Ward. He smiled quietly. Ethan Ward, Richard's former friend, now silent observer, had taken a temporary staff position for one reason, to witness the fall of a man who deserved none of his power. At 7:45, guests began to gather near the stage. A massive LED screen displayed Richard's achievements, his buildings, charity work, magazine covers. A voiceover narrated, a man who turned failure into fortune. The audience applauded. Richard raised his glass. To resilience, he toasted, and to the people who taught me what weakness looks like. Lila laughed softly, unaware of the venom behind the line. You're terrible, she teased. He leaned close. You'll see what I mean soon. In the back hallway, the maitre received a message through his earpiece. She's here. Claire stood in the marble lobby, clutching her small purse, her heart hammering. Guests turned to look, eyes scanning her thrift store gown, whispering behind manicured hands. The humiliation burned her skin, but she didn't flinch. A photographer raised his camera, mistaking her for a late guest. The flash went off, catching her face just as she lifted her chin. For the first time in years, she didn't hide. Across the room, Richard caught sight of her. His smirk widened. Right on time. Lila followed his gaze, confusion clouding her perfect smile. Who's that? No one, he lied. Just an old mistake. He gestured toward the bar. Let's make sure she's comfortable. Give her a drink. I want everyone to see her before we make the announcement. Claire walked forward, every step echoing against marble. She could feel the weight of 100 eyes. Memories flooded back. The night he threw her out, the snow, the pain. But she held her head high. The maitre led her to a small table near the stage, far enough to be visible, close enough to be judged. She sat, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on Richard. He lifted his champagne glass in her direction, like a taunt. Welcome back, Claire, he murmured under his breath. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. Because what Richard didn't know was that he wasn't the only one setting a trap tonight. The ballroom pulsed with violins and laughter. Waiters glided through the crowd, silver trays balanced like crowns. Champagne fizzed in crystal flutes as the city's elite toasted to Richard Hale's brilliance. But under the glow of chandeliers, Claire Donovan sat alone at a corner table, every sound muffled by the thunder in her chest. Her fingers gripped her purse, where the folded documents waited, the boys' birth certificates and the DNA test confirming what Richard had denied for 3 years. Each page was a loaded weapon, and tonight she was surrounded by enemies dressed in silk. Across the room, Richard worked the crowd effortlessly, his smile rehearsed, his every gesture calculated. Lila stood beside him, the diamond on his arm, radiant and clueless. Flashbulbs popped. You two are perfect together, a reporter shouted. Richard glanced at Claire's table, his grin tightening. Yes, he said smoothly. Perfect. He wanted her to see it, to burn her alive with envy and shame. But Claire wasn't looking at him. She was scanning the exits, memorizing every detail, every guard, every angle. She didn't come here to watch his show. She came to finish it. At 8:05, the MC took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a night of generosity and hope. Tonight, we celebrate the Hale Group's legacy of compassion. Claire nearly laughed out loud. Compassion? The man who left her in a snowstorm was now the poster boy for kindness. The irony twisted her stomach. She glanced toward the bar. A waiter in uniform caught her eye and gave the slightest nod. It was Ethan Ward. Her heart skipped. She hadn't seen him since the day he'd slipped her the flash drive, the one with proof that Richard's charity was laundering money through shell accounts. Now he was here, hidden in plain sight, waiting for her signal. Their plan had been simple. If reckless, she would attend the event, draw Richard's attention, and buy time. Ethan would access the media servers, upload the files, and when the moment came, the truth would explode live on the big screen. Claire sipped her water and exhaled slowly. Just a few hours. Lila approached her table unexpectedly. A bright smile painted across her face. You must be Claire, she said sweetly, the kind of sweetness that hides a blade. I've heard so much about you. Claire forced a polite smile. I'm sure you have. Lila tilted her head. Richard told me you used to help with his events. It's so brave of you to come. I can't imagine how hard it must be seeing him happy again. For a second, Claire wanted to slap that smug grin off her face, but she didn't. She leaned forward, her tone calm. Oh, I'm not here to see him happy. I'm here to make sure he remembers what truth looks like. Lila blinked, thrown off, then laughed lightly. Well, enjoy the evening. She turned, her perfume trailing like smoke. From across the room, Richard noticed the exchange. His jaw tightened. He whispered something to a guard. Claire knew he'd try to control her, like he always had, but he couldn't control what was already in motion. At 8:45, the lights dimmed. The screen behind the stage lit up, displaying the Hale Foundation, building a brighter future. A montage of smiling children played, set to triumphant music. The audience applauded. Richard stepped up to the podium, charming and invincible. Tonight, he began, we celebrate not just success, but redemption. Claire's hand trembled on her purse. Redemption. That word was poison coming from his lips. Then she saw Ethan, standing near the control booth, his eyes on her. He gave one final nod. The cue. Claire took a deep breath, rose from her seat, and began walking toward the stage. Every heel click echoed across marble like a countdown. Across the room, Richard spotted her moving through the crowd. His confident smile faltered for the first time that night. The Queen had entered the chessboard, and the storm he'd prepared for her was about to swallow him whole. The grand ballroom of the plaza had seen everything. Movie stars, billionaires, presidents, but never silence like this. It happened the moment the double doors opened. Every voice, every laugh, every glass midair froze as the cold night air rushed in and she stepped through. Claire Donovan. But she wasn't the woman they expected. She didn't come in alone. Behind her, a chauffeur in a dark suit followed, carrying 2 small coats. And then, 2 boys stepped forward, identical in every way. Mason and Leo. The crowd gasped softly as though a ghost had entered the room. The twins looked around wide-eyed, clutching their mother's hands. One of them, Mason, wore a tiny navy blazer. Leo held a small teddy bear with a hospital bracelet still around its paw. Claire, dressed in her simple navy gown, walked with quiet poise. Her face was calm, almost regal. Not defiant, not desperate, just certain. She moved like someone who had stopped running from the past and decided to walk straight through it. At the far end of the ballroom, Richard Hale turned, his smile dying on his lips. For a split second, he didn't breathe. The champagne flute in his hand tilted, spilling golden liquid onto the marble floor. Lila Stanford followed his gaze, confusion washing over her face. "Richard, who is that?" He didn't answer, his throat locked. His world, perfectly arranged for cameras and applause, began to crack. The MC's voice faltered into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a surprise guest." All eyes turned to Richard. The whispers began like ripples. "Isn't that his ex-wife? She has kids?" "They look like..." Someone didn't finish the sentence because the resemblance was too strong to deny. Richard forced a chuckle, smoothing his expression. "Claire," he said loudly, the charm returning by force. "What an unexpected visit." His tone was honey dipped in venom. Claire met his gaze steadily. "You invited me, remember?" He blinked. The crowd's murmurs deepened. Lila frowned, still smiling for the photographers. "Oh, you're Claire. Richard mentioned you. You used to work for him, right?" Claire tilted her head slightly. "Work for him? You mean married to him?" The room gasped. Glass clinked. Someone dropped a fork. Richard stepped forward quickly, lowering his voice. "This isn't the place for your drama." "No," Claire said evenly, her voice carrying through the stunned silence. "This is exactly the place. You wanted the world to see who I am. So here we are." Lila's face drained of color. "Richard, what is she talking about?" He grabbed Claire's arm, whispering harshly, "You're humiliating yourself." Claire didn't move. "I'm not the one who should be humiliated." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "These are your sons, Richard, the ones you left in a hospital incubator." The room froze. Cameras clicked. Richard hissed, "Not here." Claire ignored him. "You told the world I was unstable, that I lied about being pregnant, that I stole from you, but everyone in this room can see the truth now. 2 of them are standing right here." Mason looked up, sensing the tension. "Mommy?" Claire knelt, stroking his hair. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's just telling the truth." Lila stumbled back, shaking her head. "You said she made it all up. You said she lost the baby." Richard's face turned gray. The cameras kept flashing, recording every second. Ethan, still disguised as a waiter, glanced toward the control booth. Everything was happening exactly as planned. Claire straightened, looking Richard dead in the eye. "You wanted to shame me, Richard, but shame has a funny way of finding its real owner." The MC, sweating, cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, should we, continue the program?" Richard forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes. Let's not give our guests too much attention." But it was too late. Attention had already shifted. Every face in that glittering room was fixed on Claire Donovan and her twins. Living proof that truth can walk straight into your party, uninvited, and steal the spotlight. For a few endless seconds, the ballroom felt soundless. The music had stopped, the laughter had died, and even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Every camera turned toward Richard Hale, who now stood stiff and colorless under the golden lights. Then the murmurs began, soft at first like raindrops on glass, swelling into a storm of whispers. Those kids, they look just like him. Did he really? Richard's throat tightened. He could feel the panic clawing up from his gut. The image he'd built, successful CEO, loving fiancé, philanthropic leader, was slipping through his fingers in front of Manhattan's most powerful people. Lila Stanford looked at him in disbelief. "Richard," she hissed, her voice shaking, "you told me she was a liar. You told me she never had the babies." He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Darling, let's step outside." But Claire's voice cut through the noise, sharp and steady. "No, let's talk right here." Her words carried like a slap. Every head turned back toward her. Claire stepped closer to the stage, her hand resting protectively on Mason's shoulder. 3 years ago, I begged this man to help me save our son. He told me to stop calling. He told me they weren't his. She reached into her purse and held up 2 folded papers. "But DNA doesn't lie." Gasps erupted around the room. Photographers surged forward. Claire handed the documents to the nearest journalist, who scanned the page with wide eyes. "Signed by Richard Hale," the reporter murmured. The sound hit Richard like a bullet. "Enough," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You're making a fool of yourself, Claire." "I'm not the one who made a fool of myself," she said. "You did that when you left your children to die in a hospital." Lila took a step back, face pale. "Oh my God." The investors in the front row exchanged glances. One of them, a silver-haired man in a tuxedo, muttered to another, "If this gets out, the IPO is dead." Richard's mind raced. He could almost hear the ticking of his empire collapsing. He turned to the MC, his voice low, desperate. "Kill the lights, now." But before anyone moved, Ethan Ward appeared from the side of the room, still dressed as a waiter, holding a small tablet. "Lights won't help, Richard," he said quietly. "You might want to check the screens." Richard froze. Behind him, the massive LED display flickered. The logo of the Hale Foundation vanished, replaced by a folder of spreadsheets, transaction records, and emails, all bearing his name. The crowd gasped. Ethan's calm voice echoed through the sound system. "While you were busy performing, I took the liberty of sharing your real legacy with the world. Congratulations, Richard, you're trending again." The journalist's flashes became blinding. Lila's scream cut through the chaos. "You used my father's name for your scams." Richard lunged toward the stage controls, but Ethan stepped between them, blocking him effortlessly. "Don't bother, the files are already live." Claire's eyes never left him. "You called me weak. You told me no one would believe me. Now the truth is believing itself." Richard turned toward her, trembling with fury. "You'll regret this. You think they'll take your word over mine?" Claire gave a small, tired smile. "I don't need them to take my word. I just needed them to see your face." Security began to move through the crowd as reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Hale, is it true you embezzled funds from your own foundation? Did you abandon your wife and children?" He tried to answer, but every word drowned beneath the roar of flashing cameras. Claire bent down, picked up Leo, and whispered, "It's over, sweetheart. Mommy kept her promise." As she turned toward the exit, the audience parted like the Red Sea. No one stopped her. No one dared. Behind her, Richard Hale stood alone on the stage, his empire burning around him, his name echoing through the ballroom like a curse. Chaos erupted inside the plaza's ballroom. The once glittering party was now a war zone of voices, cameras, and gasps. The images flashing across the LED screen, emails, bank transfers, falsified donations, were still looping like a confession written in neon. Richard Hale stood at the center, frozen in disbelief. His hands trembled, his jaw clenched. He could feel every eye in the room stabbing into him. The whispers grew louder. He laundered money through his own charity. He left his wife for that senator's daughter. Those kids are his. Look at them. Lila Stanford's diamond bracelet jingled as her hand slapped him across the face. "You lied to me. You said she was unstable." Her voice cracked, breaking through the noise. "You said the babies didn't survive." Richard's cheek burned, but he didn't react. His fury was too big for words. He turned toward Claire, who stood by the door holding Leo. Ethan beside her, like a silent guardian. "Cut the feed," Richard shouted at the tech crew. "Shut it down right now." A technician hesitated. Sir, the files, someone remotely uploaded them to multiple platforms. We can't. Richard stormed toward the control booth, ripping cables from the console, but the screens didn't stop. His secrets were already spreading beyond the walls, broadcasted live by dozens of phones. He spun back, voice shaking. You think this makes you righteous, Claire? You think ruining me will fix your pathetic life? Claire didn't flinch. No, Richard, this isn't about fixing me. It's about stopping you. He laughed bitterly. Stop me? You couldn't even keep your own lights on without my money. Maybe not, she said, her tone calm, too calm. But at least my hands are clean. The words sliced deeper than she intended. The audience fell silent again. Even Lila's anger froze midair. Richard's face twisted, red from humiliation. You think you can walk in here with your little charity case and your cheap dress and embarrass me? Ethan took a step forward. Careful, Richard, there are witnesses everywhere. Richard's eyes darted to him, narrowing. You, he hissed. I should have known. The jealous partner. You couldn't stand that I got the spotlight. Ethan's expression remained cool. I didn't mind the spotlight. I just minded what you did with it. Don't lecture me, Richard barked. You're a nobody hiding behind a glass of champagne. Maybe, Ethan replied, but I'm not the one the SEC will be calling tomorrow morning. The guests gasped again. Richard's confidence cracked entirely. He lunged forward, shoving Ethan's shoulder. Two security guards moved quickly, restraining him before he could go further. Let go of me, he yelled, struggling against their grip. His voice echoed, shrill, panicked. This is all lies. She forged everything. Claire stepped closer, her voice calm and steady. You want proof? You signed every transfer yourself. The timestamps match your private calendar. You built your empire on stolen trust, and tonight, it's collapsing in front of the very people you used to deceive. Richard's breath came fast and shallow. The crowd began to pull back, some out of disgust, others out of fear of being photographed near him. Lila wiped her tears, her mascara smearing like war paint. You're finished, Richard. My father will make sure of it. She turned to leave, but not before spitting her final words. You don't deserve even their forgiveness. Richard called after her, voice cracking. Lila, wait. But she didn't look back. He turned to Claire, eyes wild. You think this is justice? You think the world will love you for this? She shook her head slowly. I don't need the world to love me. I just need my sons to grow up knowing their mother didn't stay silent. For the first time in years, Richard Hale, the man who had silenced everyone around him, had no words left. As police sirens wailed faintly from outside, echoing through the city streets, Ethan leaned toward him and whispered, You spent your life buying silence. Tonight, you finally bought the sound of truth. And that sound was deafening. The sound of the sirens outside signed the foreword. The plaza faded in Claire's ears. Everything around her, the lights, the whispers, Richard's broken shouting, blurred into background noise. For a heartbeat, she wasn't standing in that golden ballroom anymore. She was back in the hospital 3 years ago, sitting on a hard plastic chair outside the NICU. It had been 2:13 a.m. The hallway was dim and cold. Machines beeped faintly from behind the glass wall. Leo's chest moved up and down under the fluorescent light, tiny tubes weaving into his skin. The nurse on duty had just told her they couldn't continue treatment without another payment. Miss Donovan, the nurse said gently, avoiding her eyes, you've reached your insurance limit. Without additional coverage, the hospital can't. Please, Claire interrupted. Her voice cracked from exhaustion. Just keep him breathing. I'll find the money, I promise. The nurse looked torn but firm. We've already sent requests to the father. There's been no response. Claire swallowed hard. He blocked my number. But he'll pay if you tell him Leo's dying. He has to. He already told our billing department not to call again, the nurse whispered, almost ashamed to say it. The words hit Claire like a physical blow. She pressed her trembling hands against her stomach and tried to breathe, but it felt like drowning in slow motion. She remembered standing outside the hospital entrance, snow melting into her shoes as she called Richard one last time. It went straight to voicemail. Richard, she'd said, her voice barely audible. They won't operate without your signature. He's your son. He has your eyes. Please, I don't care if you hate me. Just don't let him die for it. No answer ever came. Back inside, she'd found an old coffee cup from the vending machine, lukewarm, bitter, her only comfort. Someone had written her name wrong on the cup. Claire. She laughed through her tears. Even the world forgets me, she'd muttered. By dawn, the nurse had found her asleep in the hallway, Leo's medical forms clutched in her arms. "Miss Donovan," the nurse whispered softly. "Someone paid." Claire blinked. "What?" "The bill. All of it. Anonymous donor through the hospital's emergency fund." For a moment she couldn't process the words. Then she collapsed into the nearest chair and sobbed. Loud, unrestrained, every ounce of fear spilling out. She didn't know who had saved her son that night. She didn't care. All she knew was that Leo would live. That memory, that raw desperation, now burned vividly inside her as she looked at Richard standing across the ballroom, his face pale, his mask shattered. "Do you remember Mount Sinai Hospital?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "December 22nd, 3 years ago. You told them to stop calling." Richard stiffened, eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Claire said. "You were drinking scotch at your penthouse. I know because the nurse heard the ice in your glass over the phone. You said, and I quote, 'I'm not signing anything. She can figure it out like she always does.'" The crowd around them grew quiet again. "I was sitting on the hospital floor, Richard," she continued, "holding our baby's oxygen tube, praying he'd make it through the night while you were out celebrating your deal at the Waldorf." He took a step toward her, his voice shaking. "Enough." "No," she said sharply. "You don't get to tell me when enough is enough. You left your son to die because your ego couldn't handle a woman who loved you without fear." Her words sliced through the air like glass. Reporters pushed closer, their microphones raised. One whispered, "She's telling the truth, isn't she?" Richard turned his back, but the damage was done. His empire wasn't falling from scandal. It was collapsing under the weight of a single, undeniable truth. He'd been a coward when his family needed him most. Claire took Leo's tiny hand, lifted her chin, and said quietly, "I thought that night was the lowest point of my life. But looking at you now, I realize it was yours." And for the first time, Richard had no power left to deny it. The ballroom, once the jewel of the plaza, was now a battlefield of whispers, flashing lights, and fractured egos. The charity banners that once read, "Building a Brighter Future," fluttered under the air vents like tattered flags of surrender. Richard Hale stood at the center of it all, his empire burning around him. But the one person who couldn't handle the silence was Savannah Stanford, his fiancée, his shining political ticket, the woman he'd used to polish his image. She had always looked perfect, tall, blonde, poised, the embodiment of confidence. But now her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her chest rising and falling in quick, sharp gasps. Her diamond necklace glimmered like a chain around her throat. "Richard," she stammered, voice trembling. "Tell me she's lying." Richard turned toward her, his jaw tightening. "Savannah, not now." "She just said you left your baby to die," she screamed, the words echoing through the marble hall. "You told me she was insane, that there were no children." Cameras clicked. Journalists leaned in. Richard's PR manager whispered urgently, "Sir, control her. The press is eating this up." But Savannah was far beyond control. "You said you donated millions to children's hospitals," she shrieked. "You made me pose for those pictures with sick kids for your foundation. Was that all fake too?" Richard tried to grab her arm, but she jerked away violently. "Don't touch me. Do you have any idea what this means for my family? My father's campaign? You've destroyed everything." The crowd murmured again. A senator's daughter publicly unraveling wasn't just drama, it was scandal, and every socialite in the room could smell blood. Claire stood quietly off to the side, holding Leo close. She didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching another woman crumble under Richard's lies. But she also couldn't look away. Savannah turned toward Claire, eyes wild. "You planned this, didn't you? You're trying to ruin me too." Claire blinked, stunned. "You think I wanted this?" "Yes," Savannah's voice cracked, hysterical. "You think you're some kind of martyr? You're just jealous. You couldn't keep him, so you came to destroy him. And me." Lila's voice rose from the crowd, sharp and furious. "She's not the one who destroyed you. He is." It was the first time the senator's daughter had ever been contradicted publicly. Savannah froze, blinking through tears. Claire took a slow breath, her voice calm but firm. "Savannah, I don't want your life. I just want the truth you helped him hide." Savannah's eyes darted between them, desperate, cornered. I didn't know. He said you were unstable, that you made everything up. You believed him, Claire said softly, because it was easier than asking why a man with everything needed to lie. The words landed like a quiet bomb. Savannah's knees buckled slightly. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Her PR handler rushed forward, trying to guide her away, but she shoved him aside. I'm not leaving, she cried. Everyone needs to hear this. I gave up my job, my reputation, my father's trust for you. Richard hissed under his breath. Savannah, shut up. Don't tell me to shut up, she screamed, voice cracking with rage. You said she was a threat. You said she blackmailed you. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Cameras zoomed in. Claire's eyes widened slightly. That single sentence, recorded by half the room, would become the headline of the century. Ethan, still standing near the back, whispered to a journalist beside him, There's your story, straight from the fiancé. Savannah stumbled, clutching her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. I defended you to everyone, and all this time you were lying. To her, to me, to everyone. Her voice cracked completely, and she turned, running toward the exit as security scrambled to open the doors. The crowd parted again, flashes exploding behind her like fireworks. She disappeared into the hallway, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Richard looked after her, breathing hard, eyes empty. For the first time, there was no mask left to hide behind. And from the corner of the room, Ethan's voice cut through the quiet, calm, and final. You didn't just lose your empire, Richard. You lost the one person still foolish enough to believe in you. The chaos of Savannah's meltdown still hung heavy in the ballroom, a mess of half-emptied glasses and shattered reputations. Reporters shouted questions, guests whispered behind manicured hands, and Richard Hale stood frozen at the center, breathing like a man underwater. Then, from the back of the room, a calm voice broke through the noise. That's enough. Heads turned. The crowd instinctively made way for the tall man who stepped out from behind the velvet curtains. He wasn't dressed like the rest of them. No designer tux, no glittering cufflinks. Just a simple black suit, crisp white shirt, and a look that carried the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. Claire's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to come. Lucas Ward, the man who'd once paid Leo's hospital bills anonymously, the one who'd helped her find the courage to face tonight. Until now, he had stayed invisible, letting Claire fight her own battle. But something about Richard's sneering arrogance had crossed a line even Lucas couldn't watch from the sidelines. Richard's eyes narrowed. And you are? Lucas stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Someone who's tired of watching you lie. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Several guests recognized him, the tech investor who'd quietly financed half the city's new startups. The kind of man Richard used to beg for meetings. Ethan smirked from the back, whispering to a journalist, Showtime. Lucas turned to the audience. My name is Lucas Ward. I'm here because Miss Donovan and her sons are under my company's legal protection. Any attempt to harass, defame, or threaten her will result in immediate litigation starting tomorrow morning. His tone was calm, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of iron. Richard barked out a laugh. Legal protection? Are you her bodyguard now? Or her next mistake? Lucas didn't blink. You should be careful what you say, Mr. Hale. Your last mistake was underestimating her. This one might cost you your freedom. The room went silent again. Cameras refocused. Claire tried to speak, but Lucas raised a hand slightly as if to say, I've got this. Your foundation's records, he continued, show transfers to offshore accounts owned by shell corporations in your name. My firm's analysts traced them. I've already sent copies to the Financial Crimes Unit, and judging by the agents waiting in the lobby, I'd say they found them convincing. Richard's smirk vanished. You can't prove. Oh, I can, Lucas interrupted smoothly, because I also have the voice recordings of you and your accountant to wash it through the charity wing. You remember that call? The one you thought happened on a private line? Gasps erupted. The ballroom lit up with camera flashes. Claire stared at him, stunned. She'd known Lucas had resources, but this was a complete takedown. Richard stumbled back, sweat forming at his temple. You set me up. Lucas's expression didn't change. You set yourself up. All I did was hold up a mirror. He turned to Claire then, his voice softening. Miss Donovan, you don't need to fight him anymore. He's finished. For a moment, she couldn't speak. After years of struggling alone, someone was finally standing beside her, not out of pity, but out of respect. Richard lunged forward, desperate. "You think she's innocent? She's using you. She's after your money." Lucas didn't even look at him. "That's the difference between you and me, Richard. I know what real value looks like, and it isn't written on a bank statement." The crowd broke into murmurs again, the tone shifting, sympathy now leaning toward Claire, disgust toward Richard. Security began closing in around him. The press surged forward. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Hale, are you aware of the federal charges pending?" "Ms. Donovan, how long have you known Mr. Ward?" Claire held Leo close, whispering, "It's over." Lucas placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Not possessive, not dramatic, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone anymore. And as the first flash of police lights spilled through the plaza's tall windows, Richard Hale realized the truth. The trap he'd built for Claire had become his own cage. The flashing blue and red lights outside the plaza painted the ballroom in chaos. Guests whispered in disbelief, champagne glasses abandoned on white linens. Richard Hale stood trapped under the weight of his own downfall, his foundation exposed, his fiancée gone, his empire crumbling. Yet even now, his arrogance refused to die. He straightened his tie, his voice breaking but defiant. "You think you've won, Claire? All of this, these stunts, none of it matters. Those kids are mine, and I'll take them back the second I walk out of here." Claire froze, tightening her grip on Leo's tiny hand. "You left them," she said softly. "You denied them." "Doesn't matter," Richard snapped. "You don't have the money, the stability, or the lawyers to fight me. The court will see that. You're a waitress, for God's sake. I'm Richard Hale." The room shuddered under the arrogance of that last sentence. Even the reporters exchanged glances. Lucas Ward stepped closer, his voice even. "That title doesn't mean what it used to. You're a CEO under federal investigation." Richard turned on him, shouting, "Stay out of this." But Claire was already reaching into her purse. "You're wrong, Richard," she said quietly. "I came prepared." She pulled out a thick brown envelope and placed it gently on a nearby table. The weight of it echoed in the silence. "What's that?" he demanded. "Everything you've run from for 3 years." She opened it slowly, revealing neatly organized folders, birth certificates, hospital reports, and one document sealed with a notary stamp. Proof of paternity, medical expenses you refused to pay, and a signed affidavit from your former accountant confirming the offshore transfers. Richard's face drained of color. "You forged these." Lucas crossed his arms. "They were verified this morning by our legal division. Every signature, every timestamp, every bank transaction." Claire slid one paper forward, the birth certificate of Mason Hale. Under father's name, the black ink read, Richard Allen Hale. "You signed this," she said, her voice trembling with control. "You were drunk that night, remember? You wanted to enter the NICU, and they made you sign the admission forms. You thought you were above consequences, but your own handwriting just proved you're their father. By law, by blood, by truth." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan, standing behind the reporters, gave a quiet nod. The journalists leaned forward, snapping photos of the documents. Richard lunged for the folder, but Lucas intercepted, slamming a firm hand onto his shoulder. "Touch her again," he said evenly, "and you'll add assault to your charges." Richard glared, his voice shaking. "You can't take my name from me." Claire met his eyes, unflinching. "I don't need your name. I just need your accountability." She gathered the papers back into the envelope and handed them to one of the uniformed officers now entering the ballroom. "These go with the financial evidence," she said, "and I'm requesting full custody. No visitation, no contact, for their safety." The officer nodded respectfully. "We'll process this immediately, ma'am." Richard looked around desperately, searching for allies, for someone to defend him. But the crowd had turned cold. The investors who once fought for his attention now avoided his gaze. The cameras, once his friends, now recorded every crack in his armor. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cracking. "You'll regret this, Claire. When I'm cleared, I'll take everything back. Everything you think you have." Claire's reply came like ice. "You already took everything, Richard. You just didn't realize it wasn't yours to keep." He stumbled back, the words hitting harder than any physical blow. Lucas placed his hand lightly on Claire's shoulder. "Let's go," he murmured. "You've done enough tonight." She exhaled shakily, holding her sons close as the officers approached Richard, reading him his rights. The last sound he heard before the handcuffs clicked shut wasn't the murmuring of the crowd. It was Mason's small voice calling, "Mommy?" And the realization struck him like a knife. That single word, "Mommy," had more power than his entire fortune ever did. The ballroom of the plaza looked like a fallen kingdom, glittering but hollow. The guests who once admired Richard Hale's charm now kept their distance, whispering his name like it was a curse. The sound of police radios crackled near the entrance, and the scent of spilled champagne mixed with fear. Claire Donovan stood at the center of it all, her son safe in Lucas Ward's arms. For the first time in years, she wasn't shaking. The power that Richard had used to crush her was gone, sucked out of the room, out of his voice, out of the very air around him. Richard, still in handcuffs but not yet led away, turned toward her one last time. "You think this changes anything?" His tone was venomous. "The press will move on. I'll rebuild. You'll still be nothing." Claire's voice was soft but lethal. "Nothing? You told the world I was worthless, and still I'm standing here while you're the one in chains. I think that's something." The reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in. Every word was being recorded, broadcast live. Lila Stanford, pale but composed, stepped out from the crowd. "You ruined my family's name," she said quietly, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "You used me, my father, and every charity we stood for." She looked at Claire, her expression softening for the first time. "I believed his lies about you. I'm sorry." Claire gave her a small nod. "We all believed him once." Lucas placed Mason on his hip and whispered, "You don't have to stay for this." But Claire did. She needed to. "No," she said. "He deserves to hear it." She turned back to Richard. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice. For every woman who was told she was too emotional to be believed, too poor to matter, too small to fight." Richard laughed bitterly. "You sound like a Hallmark card." Lucas stepped forward, his tone sharp. "She sounds like someone who finally stopped letting you write the story." Richard sneered. "What do you want, Claire? Money? Public sympathy? Because that's all you'll ever get. Pity." Claire took a step closer, eyes locked on his. "I don't want your money. I want my sons to grow up knowing their mother never bowed to a man who mistook cruelty for strength." A ripple of applause rose from somewhere in the back of the room. Then another. Slowly, more guests joined in, not loud or mocking, but steady, respectful. Richard's face went red. "You people have no idea what she's really like," he barked. "She's using all of you." But no one listened. The applause only grew louder. Even the officers hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment play out. Ethan Ward leaned against the bar, arms crossed, a faint smile playing at his lips. "You hear that, Richard?" he called out. "That's the sound of relevance leaving your body." The line drew soft laughter from the crowd, just enough to puncture what little dignity Richard had left. One of the officers finally stepped forward. "Mr. Hale, it's time to go." Richard jerked his shoulder, glaring at Claire one last time. "You'll regret this." "No," she said, voice calm as the winter wind outside. "You will." The officers led him through the exit, the click of his shoes fading down the marble hall. Cameras followed, flashes reflecting off the glass doors until he disappeared. Silence settled. The air felt different, lighter, freer, as if the entire room had exhaled. Lucas looked at Claire, admiration soft in his gaze. "You handled that better than any courtroom could." She smiled faintly. "He always thought power was about control. Turns out it's about conscience." Ethan raised a glass from across the room. "To the woman who turned a scandal into salvation." Claire glanced around, seeing faces she once feared. Investors, journalists, even strangers, all looking at her with something she hadn't felt in years: respect. For the first time since that night in the snow, she knew she had taken back everything he'd stolen. Her name, her dignity, her power. And this time, she wouldn't give it up again. The night outside the plaza had turned cold and sharp, the kind of New York chill that slipped into your bones and reminded you how small you were beneath the city lights. Inside, the last of the guests trickled out, murmuring into phones, their heels clicking across marble as they rushed to report what they'd just witnessed. The downfall of Richard Hale, the man who once ruled Manhattan, was now headline material before midnight. But Claire Donovan wasn't thinking about the headlines. She stood near the grand staircase, her son safe with Lucas in the corner, watching the police car pull away through the frosted glass doors. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "It's over." Lucas stepped beside her. "It's not over," he said gently. "It's only fair." She looked up at him, exhaustion in her eyes but something stronger beneath it, resolve. "No, Lucas. Fair would have been never having to fight this hard just to be believed." He didn't argue, he just nodded. Across the ballroom, Ethan approached, holding a folder of printed emails from the SEC investigators. "The arrest is official," he said. "They'll charge him with wire fraud, tax evasion, and misuse of charity funds by morning." He glanced at the kids, his tone softening. "But you'll need to set legal boundaries, Claire. Make sure he can't come near them again." She nodded slowly. "I already drafted the conditions." She walked to the same table where Richard had once flaunted his power and laid down a single envelope, white, clean, final. "This," she said, "is my line." Lucas frowned slightly. "What's inside?" "My statement," Claire replied. "To the court, to the press, and to him." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to go public? You've already won the moral fight." "This isn't about morality," she said. "It's about closure. The truth should live somewhere other than my memory." She opened the envelope and read aloud, her voice steady, even as it trembled with emotion. "I, Claire Donovan, hereby declare that Richard Hale is to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Mason and Leo Hale. Any attempt to use media, legal influence, or financial leverage against them will trigger federal litigation. These children deserve peace, not headlines. Their names will not be currency in another man's ego." She folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and sealed it. Lucas stared at her, impressed. "You really don't leave room for loopholes, do you?" She gave a faint smile. "I've lived inside loopholes my whole life, not anymore." At that moment, one of the remaining journalists approached hesitantly. "Miss Donovan," she asked, "what do you want people to take away from tonight?" Claire paused, thinking carefully. "That money doesn't make you powerful," she said finally. "Character does. And if a woman has to walk through hell to protect her children, then maybe hell should start being afraid of women." The journalist blinked, then lowered the mic slowly, visibly moved. After she left, Lucas looked down at Claire, admiration flickering in his eyes. "You've just rewritten the ending, you know." Claire exhaled. "No, I've just written the truth." She turned toward her boys, who were half asleep in the corner. Mason clutched Leo's hand, the same way they had in every hospital room, every long night of survival. She smiled softly. For years, Richard's voice had lived in her head, belittling, controlling, convincing her she wasn't enough. Tonight, that voice had gone silent. She looked back at Lucas and Ethan. "Tomorrow, I'm filing for full custody, complete privacy. No interviews after that, no TV, no dramatics. I don't want fame. I just want peace." Lucas nodded. "You'll have it." Outside, the police sirens faded into the hum of the city. Claire took one last glance at the ballroom, the glitter, the ruin, the proof that she had survived it all, and whispered to herself, "This chapter ends here." Then she picked up her sons, straightened her coat, and walked toward the door. Behind her, the golden chandeliers dimmed, leaving only her reflection in the glass, tired, fierce, and finally free. Dawn crept across Manhattan like a slow confession. The skyline, still wet with last night's snow, glittered under the first pale light. The plaza was quiet now. No flashing cameras, no champagne, no scandalous whispers. Only the lingering echo of a name that had once commanded awe but now tasted like shame. Richard Hale. Inside a modest apartment in Brooklyn, sunlight filtered through cheap blinds, landing softly on Claire Donovan's kitchen table. Mason and Leo were eating cereal from mismatched bowls, their laughter filling the room with a warmth that had been missing for years. Claire stood by the window, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her phone buzzing nonstop. News outlets, talk shows, newspapers. Everyone wanted her story. She scrolled through a headline. "The Fall of a Tycoon. Richard Hale arrested after ex-wife exposes million-dollar fraud." Below it, a smaller subheading read, "Claire Donovan declines all interviews, requests privacy for her children." Lucas had kept his promise. His PR team handled the press, protecting her from the circus that followed. Ethan was working with the district attorney to finalize Richard's charges, and Claire, finally, was free to breathe. Her reflection in the window looked different now. The lines of exhaustion were still there, but something new lived in her eyes. Peace. Not triumph, not revenge, just peace. Mason ran to her, holding a drawing. "Mommy, look, it's us." She knelt beside him, smiling. The paper showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a blue sky. In the corner, a small house sat beside a huge airplane. "Is that your brother and me?" she asked. Mason nodded proudly. "And that's Mr. Lucas's airplane. You said we might ride one day." Claire laughed softly. "Maybe we will." The phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Lucas. "Lucas, the press is losing interest. I'm heading to your neighborhood later. Bring the boys to the cafe by the park. They deserve pancakes." Claire smiled at the screen, typing back, "Claire, only if you're buying." She set the phone down, feeling a strange lightness in her chest. For years she had lived in survival mode, worrying about rent, medicine, and memories she couldn't escape. Now her world felt new, uncharted, like the first breath after drowning. On the TV in the corner, a reporter's voice cut through the quiet. Former CEO Richard Hale was transferred this morning to federal custody after being denied bail. Sources say his assets have been frozen and his legal team has resigned. In a surprising twist, his ex-wife has refused any monetary settlement, stating that justice is enough. Claire muted the sound. She didn't need to hear any more. The world could dissect his downfall all it wanted. She was done being defined by him. Later that morning, she bundled Mason and Leo into their coats and walked through the crisp winter air. The city looked softer somehow. Every honking car, every stranger's face, it all felt less hostile. At the cafe, Lucas was already there, sitting by the window with 3 mugs of hot chocolate waiting. "You're late," he teased. "Single mom problems," she said, laughing. Leo climbed onto his lap without hesitation, while Mason started building a fort out of sugar packets. Lucas watched them with an expression somewhere between admiration and heartbreak. "They're incredible," he murmured. "They're resilient," Claire corrected gently. "They didn't learn that from me, they were born with it." Lucas looked at her for a long moment. "You know, I've met powerful people my whole life, but you're the only one who fought power without having any." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the only way to win." He raised his coffee cup. "To new beginnings?" Claire clinked her mug against his. "To peace." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, dusting the city in white. And for the first time in forever, Claire didn't feel cold. She felt alive. Because this time, the storm had passed, and she was still standing. 3 days later, the storm had turned into a hurricane of consequences. Richard Hale's face was everywhere, on the covers of newspapers, on news tickers, in every conversation across the Upper East Side. The man who once hosted black-tie galas and gave lectures on ethical leadership was now being escorted into court in an orange jumpsuit and cuffs that gleamed beneath the flash of 100 cameras. The caption below the morning broadcast read, "Disgraced CEO faces 27 federal charges, including fraud, tax evasion, and child abandonment." Claire sat at the small kitchen table in her Brooklyn apartment, the same place where she'd once cried over unpaid hospital bills. Now, the bills were replaced by legal documents, custody forms, settlement agreements, and a final letter from her attorney confirming that the court had granted her sole custody of Mason and Leo Hale. She traced her finger over the official seal. "It's done," she whispered. Lucas sat across from her, a quiet smile playing on his lips. "You did it, Claire." She shook her head softly. "No, we did it. You, Ethan, the nurse who helped me that night, even the people who believed when they didn't have to." Lucas leaned back, studying her. "You know, it's strange. You've taken down one of the most powerful men in New York, and you don't look proud. You look relieved." Claire sighed. "Because pride is temporary. Peace isn't." Across the room, Mason and Leo were playing with a second-hand Lego set, their laughter filling the apartment. Claire's eyes softened. "They're the reason I didn't break. When I thought I couldn't keep going, I'd look at them and remember what love actually looks like." Lucas nodded slowly. "You fought for them, but you also fought for yourself." Before she could answer, the TV caught her attention. A live feed showed Richard entering the courthouse. He looked smaller now, his hair unkempt, his posture slumped, his arrogance dissolved. Reporters shouted his name. "Mr. Hale, do you have any statement for your ex-wife, for your sons?" Richard turned briefly toward the cameras, his eyes hollow. No comment. The doors closed behind him. For a moment, Claire just watched, her heart surprisingly steady. No anger, no satisfaction, just an ending. I used to think revenge would make me feel powerful, she said softly. But it doesn't. It just makes you empty in a different way. What fills you back up is forgiveness, especially forgiving yourself for ever loving someone who hurt you. Lucas reached across the table, covering her hand. Then what now? What does life look like after the storm? Claire smiled faintly. Quiet, honest, real. He hesitated, then asked gently, and maybe shared? She looked up, meeting his eyes. There was no rush in his question, no demand, just warmth. Maybe, she said, but not because I need saving. I'm done being saved. He nodded. Good, because I don't save people, I walk beside them. Claire's chest tightened with something that felt dangerously close to hope. A knock came at the door. Ethan stepped in, holding a stack of files. News from the courthouse. Richard took a plea deal. Claire blinked. He confessed? Ethan nodded. To everything. Fraud, laundering, false charity reports. He's looking at 25 years. No parole for at least 12. She exhaled slowly. So it's really over. Yeah, Ethan said softly. It's over. The weight that had lived in her chest for years began to lift, inch by inch. She stood by the window, watching the winter sunlight hit the rooftops. Then maybe now I can stop surviving and start living. Behind her, Mason called out, Mommy, can we go to the park later? Claire turned, smiling. Yes, sweetheart, we can go anywhere now. And as laughter filled the room, the city outside felt different, like it had forgiven her too. Spring arrived quietly in New York. The snow that once blanketed the sidewalks melted into sunlight, and the city that had once mocked Claire Donovan now seemed to bow in her favor. The chaos was over. The headlines had moved on. Richard Hale was serving his sentence in a federal facility in upstate New York. His empire dissolved, his name erased from every tower he once owned. Claire's life, once small and fragile, had grown into something peaceful, steady, and finally, hers. It had been 6 months since that night at the plaza. 6 months since she'd stood in front of a crowd and reclaimed her voice. Now, she lived in a townhouse on the edge of Brooklyn Heights, not grand, but warm and filled with light. The walls were covered in Mason and Leo's drawings, rainbows, airplanes, and a stick figure version of their family. This morning, the boys were sitting on the floor, building a Lego airplane together. Mason shouted, Mommy, look, it's flying! Claire smiled, watching them from the kitchen as she poured coffee into a mug that read, Peace over power. You're going to be pilots one day if you keep that up. Leo looked up, grinning. Only if you fly with us. Always, she said softly. The sound of a knock interrupted their laughter. Lucas stood at the door, casual in jeans and a gray sweater, holding a small white envelope and that familiar warm smile. Morning, Donovan family. Mason ran to him. Mr. Lucas, did you bring pancakes again? Lucas chuckled. Not this time, buddy, but I brought something better. He handed the envelope to Claire. What's this? She asked, curious. Open it. She tore it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, an invitation embossed with gold. Ward Aerospace, private jet exhibition, featuring new partner, Claire Donovan. Her breath caught. Lucas, what is this? He shrugged lightly. You once told me you wanted to show your boys what freedom looked like. So I thought, why not give them the sky? Her eyes widened. Lucas, I can't accept. Yes, you can, he interrupted gently. You helped me redesign our foundation's social impact program. You saved our public image. This isn't a gift, Claire. It's a partnership. She looked at him for a long moment, emotion rising like a tide she couldn't hold back. You really think I can do this? He smiled softly. You already did. You built something from nothing. That's more impressive than anything we launch into the air. For a moment, silence hung between them, comfortable, full of unspoken gratitude. Mason tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, are we gonna fly again? Claire laughed through the lump in her throat. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to fly again. That afternoon, they drove to Teterboro Airport. The hangar glistened under the sun, filled with sleek jets lined like silver birds. Reporters were there, but this time they weren't chasing scandal. They were celebrating resilience. A banner read, Women Who Rise, the new face of modern aviation. As cameras clicked, Claire stepped onto the small staircase of the jet, her name painted near the door in discreet silver letters. Mason and Leo ran ahead, shouting with delight. Lucas joined her, standing at the top step. Ready? He asked. She looked out over the tarmac, over the city skyline that once symbolized her pain. Now, it felt like home. More than ever, she said. The engines roared to life. Wind lifted her hair. The boys pressed their faces to the window as the jet began to move, their laughter echoing through the cabin. Claire took one last look at the world below, the city that had seen her fall and rise again, and whispered, "We're free." And as the plane soared into the blue above Manhattan, she finally understood. Strength wasn't in revenge or survival. It was in reclaiming her wings and daring to fly again. So, that's how the story ends. And if you're still here right now, watching until this moment, maybe something in Claire's journey touched a quiet place in your heart. The part that's tired of surviving and ready to start living again. You see, life has a strange way of breaking us before it rebuilds us. But as Marcus Aurelius once said, the obstacle is the way. What once felt like the end was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to show you your strength. Like Claire, we all have chapters filled with betrayal, loss, and silence. But healing isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming peace. It's realizing that forgiveness doesn't mean weakness. It means freedom. If tonight's story reminded you that you can rise from anything, hold on to that feeling. Let it guide you, because one day, you'll look back at your storm and whisper, "That's where I learned to fly." If this journey spoke to you, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs a little courage, and subscribe to our channel. We're building a place for stories that heal, one heartbeat at a time. You're not alone, and your comeback story might just be next.